All right, strap, okay, block, and sit. And if you're doing this at home, you take the time to come off, lay on your spine, because that much back mat work, you can really feel those for spine muscles, and if you just lay with your spine and breathe into it, it's great. But that was really, I think, good learning for us to understand some of our habits, right?
Thank you for being involved.
You're a superstar. Thanks for letting me come into your space. Okay, so let's start with the feet. So we're going to put one strap around our ankles, and we're really learning what a hips distance is, okay? So we're going to put it on our ankles, and we're going to do a hips distance. And so we're starting to learn what the habits of the feet are. So a lot of us wrinkle on the inner heel. A lot of us wrinkle on the front, sort of the opposite side of the Achilles, right? And some of us wrinkle on the Achilles, but not very many of us, okay? That's only when you've done a lot of Barbie foot and you've trained that foot well. And so we kind of figure out what foot we need to work based on our habits, right? So a Barbie foot is where I train most people to learn their feet, okay? Once you're nailing a Barbie foot, then we move away from that. But I find habitually most people need to train a Barbie foot first. So a Barbie foot is not stiletto Vegas Barbie with tons of wrinkles in the Achilles, because wrinkles are a sign of tension, right? Like think, if you laugh a lot, you get laugh lines. If you're always very expressive in your face, you get wrinkles in your forehead, right? So the wrinkles that show up in our ankles show us what we do a little maybe too much of, right? Our strength becomes our weakness. So ideally we want to have kind of like a Barbie foot, but with no wrinkles in the Achilles. We want to keep an eye on the big toe. So once we find our feet, we know that we can track the middle of the foot to the knee, to the hip bone. So most human beings can put a block somewhere in their thighs, right? But not knee knock. So there's some knee knockers out there, right? Fran, I'm looking at you. Do not knee knock, okay? So we're not allowing the knees to go more narrow. If we know that our thighs are thicker, so for me, I have thinner blocks, but I can also put the block a little bit lower. But I'm not going to think too much about squeezing that block. I want to be mindful, and when I'm holding that block lightly, I want to think about the knee and the hips staying in a straight line. So some of us tend to really squeeze that block, okay? We've got our stick. We're going to come down. We're going to make sure they're straight, because we just spent so much time learning how to not do this, right? So as we come down, we're going to be conscious that our feet, pubic bone, belly button, nose remain in a straight line. Good. Then bring your feet in a little bit closer. Stick your stick in your hip flexors, push into your elbows. Hip flexor moves at an angle. Knee knockers are just going to be like, I'm going to squeeze that block, right? I got something to do, I'm going to do it, right? No, you're actually going to drop the block, right? So this is inner line of the leg pulling apart. Stick in the hip flexors, pick up the back rib cage, push into the elbows, push to the skull, float your back ribs, keep your back ribs up. Remember, we're in child zone today. We are not going fast. We're going to learn how to traction that back. It's heavy, heavy, wet concrete. We're lengthening it. We're going to bring it down. And then just notice how you just grew. Everybody wants to grow. Hands come to the back of the skull. Lift up the back of the skull. Lengthen the back of the skull. Bring the back of the skull down. Good. And then keep your stick in your hip flexors for now. And bring your legs up. Good. Feet are nice and active. We're then going to interlace our fingers. Right hand on top of left. We're going to bring the elbows over the shoulders, and we're going to lift those elbows. So Carrie, Susan, Ashley, you guys are angel wingers, right? Kristen was a little bit of an angel winger over there. So know your habits. Lift the elbows up just right. Lift up your skull. Place your hands on the back of the skull. Good. Keep reaching with the elbows. Now bang out some shoulder push-ups here. And as you bang out your shoulder push-ups, you've got a neutral neck. And you're using your peripheral vision to find evenness in the elbows. So what would make this easier? Anybody? Feet down on the floor. Yeah, moving from a 90 to a 45. Obviously, it'd be harder if you straightened your legs, correct? But we're not going to do that today because this is enough. So find extension, no tension. See if you can find an evenness with the elbows. Some of us have to drop the block. Some of us have to squeeze the block. Good, remember, we want to take up enough space. If you were going to be on your head, do Do you have enough space, right? Or are you going to teeter over because you're not taking up enough ground space? Good. Exhale to lift the head without losing the pelvis by just pushing the back ribs down. Neck doesn't change at all. And if it's already hard enough, you don't do the lift. Inhale to come down. So for the first set, you can pick your number. It could be 5, could be 3. I certainly don't think you want to do 10. No changing that now. So really think of I'm reaching. My arms aren't going to change. My shoulders aren't going to change. I'm literally just pushing into this back ribs. Neck doesn't change. Oh God, so much better. Yes. And we're targeting different muscle groups, right? That's a better neck. So the gaze kind of looks up when you think about keeping this open and you're reaching with those elbows like this is a slingshot. So the head pushes down to get the lift in the elbows, right? If my head isn't pushing down, my elbows have no resistance. How do I get stronger? By creating resistance, right? You've got an easy life, you're probably not going to learn a lot. So now what do we add? Let's exhale to come up and hold with a neutral pelvis. Good, and just feel what that is. Again, it could be 3 breaths, 2 breaths, 5 breaths, you be your boss, but you're going to have to learn to be consistent, right? Again, taking it from like a beginner practitioner, we can be beginners our entire life, to an intermediate or advanced practitioner is minding your stuff so that you do it the same, right? And then come down. Good. And then when you're ready, you're going to repeat the same exercise. You're going to come up with a neutral pelvis. Then you're going to imprint your pelvis and come up higher. So there's learning these micro movements where we're going to exhale to come up, and then we get rid of that neutral pelvis without compromising the neck, the shoulders, or the elbows. So Kristen, with you, it's all elbows. And then we inhale to come down. We exhale to come up. And if we want to keep that imprinted low back a little bit, we can. But now we're not only pushing into our low back, but we're pushing into the manta ray ribs. And it becomes, I wouldn't say easy, but it becomes a lot easier. And again, you're doing your number, 2, 3, 5, whatever you're doing. And then you hold up for the same number of breaths. And then you come down. And then we're going to do a twist. So the legs aren't going to move. We're going to find a neutral pelvis. We're going to feel the back ribcage rooting. We're going to shoot with the elbows. We rest when we need to rest. Without losing the shoulders, we exhale to come up, and we take the left elbow to the right knee. We inhale to come all the way back down. Good. Take a breath. Big inhale, big exhale. Exhale, right elbow to left knee. Head pushes back. Good. Inhale to bring it back down. Elbows, shoulders don't change. Exhale to the other side. Inhale, back down. Exhale to one side. Inhale, back down. And maybe you're doing sets of 2, and then you come up and hold up. Can you keep the elbows or shoulders distance apart? You count how long you're holding. And then you come down, you take a little rest. You come up to the other side, and you count how long you're holding. And then you bring it down. And then release your arms, let your feet come down. Hands on the belly, take some big belly breaths. Go taut with your feet there for Natalia, just a little bit. Go taut, like pull the strap apart. I don't know if I put up this distance. Let me just check it. Make it a little tight. Now remove the block from between your thighs for a moment. Good. And then come up into a little bridge, keeping the knees right over the ankles. Have the feet straight like a pair of skis. Make sure the heels are level. So you know if one foot's forward or back, because you can actually sit up and look at your strap. Right? And you can see if you're twisting. So that's not a good distance. No, sit up and put your fist between your thighs. Number one, just sit up. Look at your feet.
Well, it's interesting because I have them first, and then I did. And I felt like everything was all over the place.
So now, taut. Now measure that. See the difference? Yeah. And then with you, you gotta really watch that your equal distance from your butt. So come up into your little bridge. Think of a block between your thighs. Are you someone that needs to drop the block, or are you someone that needs to squeeze the block? What's happening with your butt? What's happening with your hamstrings? What's going up? What's going down? And then what is and you can show me, right? If you felt your knees, what's the first thing you would do? Walk your feet away from you, right? If you want more out of the pose, where's the optimum place for the ankles to be?
Did you rephrase that?
If you want optimum lift, like if you want strength, your knees are great, you don't have, your quads aren't tight, so there's no pulling into your knees. Where's the absolute best place for your ankles to be? What angle should your shins be? 90 degrees, so ankles right underneath the knees. For power, right? So that'll give you more depth, more power. What's your habit here? Are you able to lift the shoulders, but push the mandibular ribs down? Knees in, guys. Know your habits. And feet straight. Your feet are pigeon toed. Yeah, so big toes out, big toes out.
My feet feel too far apart.
Big toes out. It's interesting, right? And you're getting your cramps, which is good, right? We're getting parts you're not used to getting. And then come down, and then we're going to look at that with a twist, okay? And we could do a shin lift there, but I think we all were having just enough with it not doing a shin lift there. So we'll look at a shin lift here, okay? So I'm now going to put the stick behind my knees. Good. I'm going to find my crease stick and watch this one. You're going to watch it because you're going to not know what you're going to do otherwise. We make sure our ankles are wide enough so that when we do a shin lift, I can sight this, right? And one thing we gotta really start to learn is what a hips distance is, because that's an important body awareness. Then I'm gonna put my stick in my knees, I'm gonna bring my arms out, I'm gonna go side to side like this, learning how to keep, what rotation is this teaching me of my femur? Anybody? What rotation is this?
External?
Nope, neutral. So if my feet come together, what rotation is that?
External.
Yeah, if my feet came apart, what rotation is that? Right? What do you think my knees like best as a hinge?
Neutral.
Yeah. Think about a hinge, right? How do you hang a door? Neutral. Right? So we go side to side, and then we can do a shin lift. Watch, you're not sitting like that. So side to side, and then you can choose to do a shin lift or not. Okay? So here I'm doing a shin lift. Good. And then I'm going to come, and I'm actually moving the strap a bit, which is interesting. I'm going to hold it, right? And then I'm going to bend, come to the other side, and then I'm going to do a shin lift on this side. Good. So you should be watching this, not doing this. This is important. Yeah. So when I demo, we're going to watch first, okay? So watch, good? And then I'm going to come down at what's appropriate. And what happens here? You see my feet? See how one leg, I might bend my knees for this, or I might be straight. But what's happening? Are my fingers level? No, they're not. You can see it in the strap, you can see it in my knees, right? So if I was going to move this knee deeper, what's the base of this knee? My sacrum, right? So see, I can level out my knees, I can level out my feet. Why is that important? Neutral? Yeah, and what does neutral do? Louder, like you're teaching. If I can't hear you, being free. Being pain-free is good, so I'm strength training. I'm strength training my pelvis so the muscles are working in this deep twist, number one. And number two, what do you think my pelvis is making me avoid in this posture? Right where I don't want to open. So the minute I adjust my pelvis, it takes me right to where I'm avoiding. So like if the roof is crooked on your house, right, you don't start with the roof, right? You go down to the base of the house and you ideally want to level out the base of the house, right? So our pelvis is the base of our house. Our legs are part of that, right? That's the basement of our house. And some houses have basements and some houses don't, right? Their basements are level. If you're in a standing pose, you have a basement, right? But this would be, want to be level too. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. So let's do that twist, okay? So this is wind remover core. Wind remover core, we start with obviously basic core, right? And then you've got two other core recipes, right? You've got sleepy cow, which we've done a lot in class lately, and we have this, right? This is for headstands. So those of you that want to do headstands in the next 6 months, it's a lot of this, right? Because this is stage 1 headstand prep. All right, so you got your stick in the backs of the knees. You bring the legs in. Your arms are halfway to a T, right? And then you're going to do some shin lifts. I guess the stick doesn't have to be there yet, but you can have the stick there. And I kind of showed lifting up into the backs of the knees with my hands, right? And doing a shin lift without the thighs moving. So it actually is helpful to have the stick there because it makes you see how the quads and the hamstrings work. And elbows. Feet nice and active. And then bend to hold the stick, lift the stick up into the backs of the knees, traction your back. So find as neutral pelvis as you can, traction your back, traction your skull, bring the arms up halfway to a T, and just go and twist as far as you can without your shoulders lifting. And you just go back and forth. Now think manta ray ribs. Think everything that you just learned about core. And if I take my thighs away from me, what does that do? So take your thighs away from you.
Makes it easier.
For a lot of people, it makes it easier depending on how strong your hip flexors are. It takes it a little lower, right? So if I was working digestion, I might want to take my legs away, right? And then what if I find a neutral pelvis in the pelvis, right? So my thighs would be at what angle if I had a neutral pelvis? Most likely a 90. And then go back and forth, and what does that feel like? It's kind of more bottom ribs, manta ray ribs, right? And then if I pull my thighs in closer, it moves it up. If I bring my thighs in closer, I think neutral pelvis, and one day I might be able to keep a neutral pelvis here. And then let's bring our legs all the way to the right. Good. And then let the stick drop. Sometimes the stick stays because the block's in the right place. And then do a shin lift. Without your shoulder lifting. Thighs don't move at all on the shin lift. Elbows, hands, shoulders, manta ray ribs. Straighten as much as you can straighten to hold. Keeping that strap taut on those ankles. So that's inner line of the leg pulling apart. Bend your knees, bring it over to the other side. Bang out some shin lifts. So Dwayne, you gotta keep those ankles taut. Especially with guys, the taut ankles can be tough. They love to externally rotate and walk around like that. Watch those necks. Is your neck neutral? Right? And then once you've done the same amount, because you're counting, because you're responsible for your body in an intermediate stage, right? So you're making sure you're counting your reps, because your mind is so in it, you know what you're up to. And you straighten to hold. Good. Back floating ribs root. Excellent. And then go back and forth a little bit and see if you've got a range with what you've chosen, right? So if you can come all the way down and all the way up, great. But if you can't, what do you do to make it easier so that you can find a bigger range? You do less, you bend your knees. And then come all the way down to the right. Shoulder stays, good. And then try and level out your pelvis by pulling the right femur in and taking an imaginary hand to the back of the left pelvis and pushing it. So the back of the left pelvis gets that air mattress, and we pull the right femur in. And that's how we level out our knees or level out our heels. And we want to go all the way to the floor if we can. So do what you need to do. Good. Try to keep the shoulders down, so instead of lifting the shoulder, what would you do to make it less? Take the thighs away from you and take your feet to the floor. So if the thighs move away from you, you're going to have the shoulder down. Does that make sense? No. I want the knees to come to the floor. So that's so if, for example, my shoulder is lifting through my knees to the floor, if I take my feet to the floor, I can usually get that rotation without my shoulder lifting, right? So when I'm here, how do I do less? I take my feet to the floor, and then I can find, does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Works.
Yeah. Because here we want that, the ribs, the 3 core points to root, right? And then come out of it using your manta ray ribs. I did this so much my first trip to India, it's magical. I mean, he doesn't use props, but it's very good for you. And then come down to the other side. Don't let the shoulder lift. If the shoulder wants to lift, you do less. How do you do less? Bend your knees. How do you do even less? Take your thighs away from you, as if you were putting your feet to the floor. And then see if you can come down so that knee comes all the way to the floor. If you can, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it. Zero pain, but you can do it. Now lift your ankles and squeeze your thighs. Just the top ankle. Does that feel okay in your back? Neck, 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 neck. So a couple things we need to learn as we move into learning more technical stuff. We can listen with our ears without moving our head, and that is important, right? You don't have to see me to hear me. And the best thing to do is to listen and then move, because if I give you a cue 9 times out of 10, you're gonna do the opposite of what I ask you to do right off the bat because we're reactive, right? And when we're reactive, we usually go into not our best habits, right? So like Steven says something that pushes my buttons, I'm probably not gonna react as my best self. So I have to take a minute, I have to breathe, I have to actually listen to what he's saying, and then if I'm being my best self and want the best results, I can come at it listening. Does that make sense? So same with asana. The minute I say what's happening with your elbows, you're probably going to reinforce the back habit instead of just listening and thinking, what am I doing with my shoulders or my elbows? Doing the math and then me saying, hey, how would you fix that? Or me saying, this is how you would change that, right? And then what happens is you actually remember the cue. Bend your knees if you need to or not, and then come back to neutral. Good stuff. Put your feet on the floor and give yourself a little bridge. Think of your feet, think of your knees, think of the tracking, ditch the block from between your thighs. And then any little bridge you like. And eventually you just memorize when the shins are at 90. And you really think flesh of butt away from low back, middle of the butt to the sky. So actually just roll off really quick, just you, because I want you to look at David, because you guys have the same habit. See his low back? Do you see? Yeah. And so think of both of your asanas and think of both of your this, which is why we're doing that on our back, which is the next thing David needs. Make sense? So Dave needs to think flesh and butt away from low back, middle to butt up. As if you almost were trying to imprint your low back, Dave. Because the anterior tilt is so strong here. You want to, yeah, exactly. Because that's where the psoas is catching. Yeah. It keeps you from getting flat hip flexors. It's virasana essentially, right?
This is like sitting on the wall side.
Yeah, saddle pose. It's also prep for, this is where your booty catches you in this pose. It's that. And I've got a million different ways to get it to shift. All right, and then come down nice and slow, D-strap, roll off to the side, and then let's look at it with the other bind, okay? Where are we for time? All right, so that was, so there's two actions of the leg, right? So we think panini sandwiches on the bones. One is inner line of the leg dropping the blocks, right? Inner line of the leg pulling apart. One is outer line of the leg squeezing in. So those are the two panini sandwiches this way, correct? Obviously, we have panini sandwiches this way, we have panini sandwiches this way, we have panini sandwiches this way, but that is this, which is a very primary one, okay? Because obviously the knee and the ankle are part of that sandwich, okay? So what was that training you? Outer line or inner line? That exercise that we just did. Anybody? Was that teaching you to pull your legs apart, or was that teaching you to squeeze your legs in? There you go, pull apart. So that's inner line of the leg pulling apart.
Why was it pulling apart?
Like, I'm just thinking sort of a pull, but why specifically pull it wasn't?
Well, because I'm going to show you squeezing in. Yeah, but it was a little bit of outer thigh squeezing in, but mostly it was trying to drop the block between your knees, otherwise you lose your ankles, right? Makes sense? So then for the other one, we're going to try the opposite way. So we're going to go a little bit bigger on the strap around the knees. Good. And then we're going to take a block between our feet. I always am a little mindful of the ankles, and I do my best to hold my block outside of the ankles, right? And then I have my second block. Good. And I'm going to put it here. So I want to try and find, right? I'm going to measure. I'm going to make sure I'm measuring this so that I'm keeping it real. So what I don't want to do is this. So I'm going to notice when this gets taught. And if I'm a real knee knocker, like the only person in Zoom land that I think is a real knee knocker is Fran, and she knows it. So Fran might want to do it without the block between her knees. Does that make sense? Play with it, but if you feel like you're cheating, like you know when you're cheating. We know when this is cheating, right? And I don't want this to be like creating like a really deep into the muscle. I want it to be like I can slide my fingers, but I can play guitar. So again, sometimes we have to do too much of a good thing. She had to pull her arms all the way out to actually get them to level, to feel those muscles because they're just not used to being felt, probably because of scar tissue and just lack of strength training. But then she's going to have to ease it a little bit. So we may feel like we have to go too much, but then we really got to use our mind's eye to do less. Does that kind of make sense? And then we're going to do the same routine. So we started with the traction, right? We came up into it, good stuff. We're going to do a little shin lift, right? We're going to put the stick here. We're going to hold it. We're going to do a little core. So with the core, you see how I brought it in? And you see how my neck and my elbows don't move at all. And then I can take it in here if I really want to. Woo! But there's no effect on the neck, and I can do it without my hands, because my neck is, what is my neck? It's strong, correct? Right? So anytime we want to think of a headstand, we want to have everything be super strong. If my elbows are moving here, if my elbows are not level, you can take a stick and they're probably pretty gosh darn level, even in a twist, right? Because eventually, we're doing twisted arm balances, right? That's this term. And what we want to be pretty freaking neutral in our, muscle use. If we're going to do a twist and stand on our hands and put weight on our wrists. So let's give it a shot. We know our numbers, right? 2 is a fantastic number, right? So you're doing reps of 2, right? Then rest for 2, then hold for 2, right? Do we exhale or inhale as we come up with 4?
Exhale.
Exhale up, inhale down, right? It's because it makes you smaller, it makes the muscles contract. right? Normally we do the movement with the inhale because we usually go deeper with the inhale, so we want the lungs to be bigger because when we exhale, we can actually go further, right? So I usually inhale, a twist, I exhale too. I don't know if that makes sense. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. So I'm less likely to go too deep if I'm inhaling, but with the core because I want to use those intercostal and core muscles, I exhale. But it's different in physio. You guys teach it the opposite, hey? Yeah. Yes. So one block between our feet with the ankles, right? Above the block ideally, right? We gotta really set up. I always make the habit of sitting on my strap because these new straps are so long. And then I usually put a block between my knees, right? A lot of people teach don't put a block between your knees, and it's not okay in a couple circumstances. One is if your student has no clue what hips distance is, right? Because if I had my feet too wide, then that wouldn't be good. So everyone's actually going to physically take their stick and measure it, right? And just see if they can get it its distance. Good. And then you come down and you know that it's all good, right? And then you want to, when you're down, you want to traction the back, you want to traction the skull, and then we're all going to meet here with the stick behind the backs of the knees and just find that first. Relax the shoulders, fire up the feet, and then see if you can do a couple shin lifts here with the thighs as close as you can, but keep a neutral pelvis. But if you want to ditch the neutral pelvis to get those thighs in, but think muscles of a neutral pelvis. And when we use the muscles of the neutral pelvis, then they're working, right? We have the awareness to use them so that the back isn't doing all this work, right? So that the hamstrings are working, the calves are working, the quads are working, the feet are working. And then bend to hold, right? Interlace your fingers, lift your elbows, bang out a couple shoulder push-ups because you know that that habit is so strong. Helium in the face to lift the face. Place the hands on the back of the skull. Your head is a rock and it's heavy. The elbows are lifting the head. One thing about core that people don't get is there's 3 points that we root into until we lift into them. I get it, everything's counter. We root into the pelvis, the mandibular ribs, and the skull. The head pushes down for core. Good. And then we're going to exhale to come up. We're going to inhale to come down. We're going to exhale to come up, and we're going to inhale to come down as many times as we like. We hold up for as many counts as we like, and then we do the twist. We can also train thighs away, thighs to us, like anything. You could do, dual leg lifts. You could do heel drags. We could go on for, we could do an entire 3-hour workshop just on sleepy, not this is sleepy cow, this is wind remover core. We could just keep taking all the core movements and just keep going. So let's find those elbows and reach with those elbows. Your elbows want to touch the wall behind you, Kristen, at an angle. So stop, take the elbows apart, shoulders distance, just shoulders. So again, gotta wait, right? Not fully apart, small, tiny micro movements, right? Now take your elbows to the wall behind you. So think of a headstand. There is a wall underneath your elbows and your wrists. So you need to karate chop into that imaginary floor. In this case, there's a wall, right? So now the neck is not going to change. Bingo, that's what I'm looking for. Keep those elbows at shoulder's distance from me down. And I could do this with my feet on the floor. I could do this with my feet on the wall. Sometimes I teach it feet on the wall and take your feet away from the wall, which is the meanest thing you can ever do. Core by a wall, not using a wall, that's hard. Hug those shoulders for me there, Chris. Hug them, hug them, hug them. There you go. So it's you gotta take those humerus bones out of your shoulder sockets, and then you think big, heavy sandbags, bowling balls in your armpits. But those shoulders are lifting those bowling balls. Because the armpit is trying to get to the floor, and the shoulder is lifting up, because that is a panini sandwich. That's a belly to the back, that's plugging in a leg. If I did it, you can do it. I got it.
So we should be doing this with like,
I appreciate it.
What's that?
we should not be imprinting on this one.
You can imprint in this one. What you should be focusing on is your shoulders. Come down. Come all the way down. Head down. Now neck, right? So you know that you're a triple chinner and you know that your shoulders are your neck, right? You know that about yourself. So I want you to lift your shoulders away from the floor, just your shoulders, not your head. Just lift, yes. So before you come up, you know you need to lift your shoulders. So you shouldn't be coming up if you're not able to lift your shoulders. Now, just the ribs root. And you can use your low back too, which would be an imprint, but the shoulders don't change.
So would you choose to imprint or choose not to imprint?
It depends on what you're trying to do, right? So if I was trying to train my neck and shoulders like you, I would probably not imprint as much. Does that make sense? And I would just focus on the shoulders, because right now your shoulders are losing them. So bring your head down. Now lift your shoulders up. Like there's air mattresses underneath your shoulders. Good. So Chris is having a hard time with her shoulder air mattresses. What's something she could do to work on that? What would you do if she was your student? You just want her to work on that for a week. What homework do you give her?
Joint stability series.
What's that?
Joint stability series.
Joint stability series would be good. What about doing this on a bath mat with her feet on the floor? But all of those answers are right? Anything that pulls her arm bones out of her shoulder sockets. But because she's good at moving her arm bones to extra train hers, I'd make her do this on a bath mat, right? And just not let her shoulders hug the bath mat. Is one way, but there's a million different things you can suggest to her. She could do cat-cow. All right, so let's take it into a twist once you feel you're even. If you want to do a back bend in between, do. If you don't, you don't. What should your arms be doing in the twist? Think about it. So don't lift your head, right? Don't move when you think, right? So where should your arms be? What's the most optimum position for you to move your legs back and forth with your arms? Halfway to a T. So if we're going to start twisting and we teach our students how to twist, where are their arms? Halfway to a T. Where are your wrists and your arms are halfway to a T? With your pelvis, right? What else is happening when your arms are halfway to a T? Try finding your elbows halfway to a T, and then try finding your elbows in a T. So try keeping your elbows really, truly, honestly on the floor halfway to a T, and then try keeping your elbows on the floor at a T. It calms down. Either way. Look what happens to your rib cage. What happens when your arms come up? What you lose? Your manta ray ribs, right? So why is it easier when the arms are lower? Because you're doing less. See how those elbows lift? Let's keep those elbows rooted. How do we keep those elbows rooted? By rooting them and also by pushing into the manta ray ribs. Elbows and upper back are really connected. And then once you've gone back and forth, remember we go to one side, we hold, and we do some shin lifts. So once we've gone back and forth, we go to one side, we hold, we bang out some shin lifts. If it feels weird on the knees, then just ditch the block between the knees, but keep the strap taut but not tight. And then once you've done the right number of shin lifts, you bend, you bring it back to center, you go to the other side, you bang out your shin lifts on the other side. And then find what you think is an appropriate range of your leg straightening. Find an appropriate bend and bring those legs down nice and slow. So if they don't come down, you take the thighs away from you or you bend the knees more. But you keep your shoulders down. Think manta ray ribs. Floating ribs to one another, manta ray ribs root. So your three root points are pelvis, back rib cage, back of the skull. And then check out your knees. Are they level? Shoulder down if you can. Arm lower will help. See the difference? So Chris, you feel how you're lifting your shoulders and your back rib cage. So there's no concrete in your back rib cage. So too much of a good thing. So come back to center, neutral neck, 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 neutral neck. Now put manta ray ribs down. Yeah. Now don't move your head, just move your legs. Manta ray ribs, 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 manta ray ribs. So you compromise that upper back to go deeper, whereas it's probably more appropriate for you to like keep the upper back, not go as deep. Because where are you weak? Shoulders. Yeah. What are you good at? Twisting. So what do you want to strengthen? Not your twists. Shoulders, not your hamstrings, because you can straighten those, no problem. But what we want, what we're missing, is shoulder strength too if you want to do a handstand, which, you know, why not? What do you do with your precious gift of time, right? You either get better or you get worse. Very few people stay the same. Personally, I'm way more interested in getting better. And then take it to the other side. So you stay there for me just for 1 sec there, Ashley. Push into your arms, reach with your elbows, mentorate your ribs, pull your arms out. Now lower your legs without lifting your shoulder. Reach with your elbow. Get that elbow down. Push that elbow down and take your thighs away from you. Slide the 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 thighs away from you. Good. Now let the legs come down. You have to slide the thighs away from you more. Zero pain, but you have to do less so that you can twist. How's that feel? Does it feel okay? So less would be thighs away from you.
It's weird because that creates like a bigger angle in my knees, whereas I thought smaller angle easier, but it's not getting me anywhere.
And this is where we have special bodies, right? And the beauty of special bodies is they teach us so much more. I don't do as much yoga as I do because my body is, it's very special, but not in an easy way. Right? A few people are born with deformed bodies, and it just means that you have to learn more in order to be pain-free. But the beauty is then you can attract people that also want to be pain-free, that also have deformed bodies, and you know how to help them through experience, right? And if the word deformed is offensive, teach me another word, because there's just not, I don't know, what's a better word for that? Unique. Unique body, there we go.
That's everybody.
I don't think there's
Unique and
anything wrong with
special.
it.
Well, it's just, yeah, because some bodies, everybody's
Disabled.
unique, but then some bodies, they have a different shaped pelvis. And some bodies have a spine that twists, which is, you know, it's unique, but it's also like not average. We're all unique, but more average. Less average unique, I don't know. You get what I mean. Somebody came up with a great word for it once. And then when you've done your two sides the same, of course it left me. It's good though, I like that one. My daughter calls things there. That's sweet, I like that. That's better, I call myself a freak of nature. I think unicorns is a much better term.
But how would you improve the nature of work against you?
Well, like, I mean, I have to, like, my neck is shaped differently than the average woman's neck. I had a lot of health issues as a kid. I have a lot of asthma. I'm allergic to the world. Like, literally, like, if I touch grass, I would break out in spots. You know what I mean? Like,
Also, really.
I'm really, like, I had a teacher call me an alien. I don't belong on this planet. Which didn't offend me, but offended a lot of people in the room, right?
I'm hypersensitive to the world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and some people just come to life with more challenges, right? And I don't think mine are very big, you know. Children get cancer, there's no rhyme or reason to it, you know, like I don't understand that, but that's their dharma, which sucks, and I don't think it's right. All right, so then come back to neutral. Let's ditch all the blocks, ditch all the straps. We're gonna have the knees together, the feet together. Mine was also nature and nurture, because I also played sports that were incredibly hard on my body, which certainly didn't help either. All right, so knees together, feet together, fingers and hip flexors, Tuck your hip flexors and angle towards your butt. Push into your elbows, lift up your back rib cage, lengthen your back rib cage away from the pelvis, bring your back ribs down, lift up the back of the skull, lengthen the back of the skull. Good stuff. Cross the right leg over the left leg. Keep the pelvis level. So fire up those feet. Now manta ray ribs down. So let's move our fingertips so that our pinky fingers are on the lowest ribs and our thumbs are on the back rib cage. Now I want you to imprint your low back. And then I want you to go back to lumbar curve natural. Imprint, lumbar curve natural, imprint, lumbar curve natural, imprint, lumbar curve natural. Good. Now keep the floating ribs down, keep the neutral spine, lift your back just a little bit, but keep your manta ray ribs down. So, just for fun, let's think about imprinting our low back. Let's move the flesh of the butt away from the low back. Keep thinking about imprinting your low back. Lift your pelvis up without your front ribs popping at all. Push into your elbows, pull your elbows apart. So we've got the manta ray ribs of the back rooting, but our elbows are the wings of the manta ray. And the manta ray wings pull apart, push down, lift up, move down, lift up. So the elbows are pushing in all directions. And what I'm thinking of here is I'm thinking of moving the flesh of the butt away from the low back, right? I'm going to think about imprinting my low back, and I'm going to think about lifting my butt higher. Because often in a back bend, we perpetually dump into our low back. Flare those wrists, shoulder heads to the ground. Come here there, Chris. Yep, shoulders, shoulders, shoulders. Good. What else do we tend to do? What's the habit in a back bend? What rotation of the hips?
External.
External. What does that make, Grumpy? Knees and something else too. Sacrum, low back, right? So what rotation is this teaching? Internal rotation. What's that doing to our low back? Creating space, right? What do we want in a back bend? Not to be dumping into that low back. What else it does is as we age, our sit bones come to one another. They start to shorten, and learning how to find this space in a back bend, I find extremely useful in keeping that space as we age. Come down nice and slow, one disc, one vertebra at a time, arrive at the neutral pelvis. Traction the opposite way. So we got used to tractioning the ribs away from the pelvis, and now we're tractioning the pelvis away from the manta ray ribs. See how your front rib cage popped, Chris, and your shoulder heads popped? Yeah. So what you want to really think of is liquid concrete in that back rib cage. Swap the crossing. Make sure, so this time the left leg is on top, so let's make sure that that right heel is right in line with the right tailbone. Good. Make sure the right foot is not sickling. Great. And again, there's too much of a good thing. We can go too much, where we bring the ankles really close. We can go far, where it almost turns into an external rotation. So just find what's right for your heels dropping the block. And then push into your hip flexors, traction the back ribs, lift up your skull, traction your skull. Keep a neutral pelvis as you lift up, and then imprint your low back, move the flesh of the butt away from the low back, and lift your hips until eventually there's no hip crease. But there's also no popping of the ribs. So eventually that hip crease disappears when we find a neutral pelvis. And this trains neutral pelvis for many poses, right? Can someone name what kind of pose if you can get a neutral pelvis this would train? Yep, Supta Virasana style pose is a big, get a catch or a pull into their low back in Supta Virasana. Good. What's another one? Camel's a good one, yeah. Praying cow, you know, we do camel with our legs crossed. That's a goodie. This is very good for that. And any big back bend. Urdhva this is really hard to teach, and the adjustment is so invasive that I only do it on really, really close friends. So this is a great way to be able to get that sacrum literally lifting up and pulling away from the low back, which we need in deep back bends to find that neutral pelvis so that we don't pivot on one vertebra. And then when your sides feel the same, you're going to come down so slow and find your neutral pelvis. Uncross. And then take either a cobbler pose with the soles of the feet on the floor, or a creeper pose with the soles of the feet on the floor, or a cobbler pose with the knees wide. But feel your pelvis, feel the sacroiliac crest that we refer to as the hip bones, feel your rib cage, put your manta ray wings out, your elbows out, traction your back, traction your skull, and then finding a nice deep, full breath up and down your spine. So when you have a neutral spine, there are 3 root points. What are those 3 root points? See if you know them. You don't have to say them aloud. I'll say them aloud in a sec. What are your 3 core root points? Pelvis, rib cage, skull. And they root down, but eventually we root down to lift up, right? So we cannot get attached to just pushing down. Most human beings have to learn how to push down first, right? But then we have to, if we are, say we're doing a standing pose and we're just pushing back, eventually it's too much of a good thing. Think about all poses, all cues, all alignments. Eventually, your weakness becomes your strength, and then your strength becomes your weakness if you don't figure out where the compromise is, right? Let's go 10 more breaths here. Now see if you can root into the pelvis a little more. And to root to the pelvis, outer line of the legs squeeze in, femurs push into the pelvis. You have to squeeze a big, huge ball between your knees, and you've got to pull the femurs in. And notice how the weight moves into the pelvis. And then see if you can find a little more focus on the back rib cage. How do you find the back rib cage? You think front floating ribs drop to one another. You visualize sandbags on those front floating ribs. And then I visualize, concrete or something liquid wrapping around the entire back floating ribs, rooting them down, and then I push into the elbows. And what else do I do to get those ribs to root? I lift the shoulders up, away from the floor, like they're hugging forward, but not letting the shoulder heads pop, because that would be too much of a good thing. So I put imaginary sandbags on the shoulder heads, the fronts of the shoulders, and then I visualize hands raising the roof on the back of my shoulders. And that lets my imaginary ribs just get so snugly tied into there. And then I find the back of the skull, and I root my head down. Think of that concrete. And then go pelvis, ribs, skull, without changing the spine. Ribs, pelvis, skull. Pelvis, skull, ribs, pelvis, skull, ribs, skull, pelvis, ribs. And then find all 3 evenly. And then draw your knees to one another. Keep it even. Keep lifting or pushing into the back body. Roll off. Bring yourself up. without losing the pushing back. Then tabletop. I get really nerdy with this stuff. I know it's so nerdy. And then come into your tabletop without losing it. So now the concrete becomes helium. And then we're going to look at our arm rotation here. But see if you can keep that connection with those 3 root points. A lot of us lose the head in tabletop. A lot of us go angry kitty in the shoulders. What does an angry kitty do in the shoulders? It's like not lifting your shoulders off the floor, right? So think about that one. We see a lot of this, right, where we're still popping the ribs. We get this lift like a hunch here, right? Whereas we don't want that. We want the shoulders to kind of hug to the ground. We want to find extension, no tension. We want to find the lift in the management ribs. We want to find the lift in the pelvis. We want to find the lift in the back of the skull. We want to find all 10 fingers. We want to find the circumference of the palms and bang out a couple shoulder push-ups without the elbows changing. And then find just right. Externally rotate, internally rotate, externally rotate, internally rotate. Look at your hands, look at your wrists as you do this. Now push evenly into your hands, pull your fingers towards the palms. Hopefully by now we know which number we're maybe not firing in our hands. If we don't, Thursday we cover it in the workshop. And check out your elbows. They might not be a 45, but one day they will be. Because you can. And check out the hands, are they even? Right? So if my right elbow is more externally rotated, then I need to find which edge of my hand? Thumb. Right? If my elbow creases are pointing back towards my body, which might be Dave's case, then I want to find which edge of my hand? The pinky. So try it. Put more weight in the pinky, put more weight in the thumb. Put more weight in the pinky, put more weight in the thumb. And then find weight even between the pinky and the thumb. Good. Now think about bending your elbows. Think about lifting your wrists. So the crease of the wrist is lifting up. And what does that make work? Your forearm muscles. What do you think your wrists want you to do if you're going to do vinyasa flow for the rest of your life? They want you to use your forearm muscles. They really want you to do that. So repetitive strain injury happens in life, but we're also seeing that it happens a lot in Western yoga. Why Western yoga? Because for some reason we think we don't need a teacher. And we want to be an expert before we even learn how to learn. Find that nice neutral neck, lift up into your back ribs, lift up into your pelvis, lift up into the back of the skull. And then for fun, nothing changes. So do less, go slow, child zone in a school zone, take your hip flexors back. Traction your hip flexors to your armpits and your skull. See if you can take it into a down dog without your hands or your elbows changing. And maybe you can't. Maybe your hands and elbows aren't up for it. So maybe you have to train puppy for the next 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months. Who cares? What we care about is that when we're 80, we can do whatever we want and not have pain. It's called maintenance yoga. To maintain our body so that we can do the things we love until the day we leave the earth. It's called my yoga because it's individual, right? What your maintenance is not my maintenance. My maintenance is very different than your maintenance because I've done so much maintenance. And because I have a different body, and because I have a different lifestyle. Let's go 10 more breaths here. And then when those 10 reps are complete, we're gonna come down into tabletop position.